Hello, everybody, and welcome to What's Up with Mo, with Pete and Joe, a weekly podcast discussion about Missouri politics and the future of the Show Me State. I am Joe Zahn, former local cable television personality and respected editorial columnist for my high school newspaper.
Oh, wow.
And I'm here with Mr. Peter Meredith.
Hey, I'm Peter Meredith. I'm state rep for another couple days here in St. Louis. In the Missouri legislature, I guess I don't get any more days actually in session, sadly, or not so sadly, depending on my mood.
Or your perspective, who you're talking to, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer and a dad and a singer and figuring out where to take this stuff next.
All right. Well,
other than talking with you about politics.
Well, that's certainly something that we are doing right now. So, but before we do that, I just thought I'd ask you, this is going to be our last podcast for the year 2024 as we move into the new year. It also coincidentally is only our second podcast, but nevertheless, I thought it could be fun to just ask you, what's your favorite moment from 2024? I'll give you a second to think about it. I'll tell you, mine personally.
Yeah, let's do yours first.
Yeah. So we have there's a couple, right? Like we went to Disneyland with the kids for the first time this year, and they did the character breakfast. That was pretty magical. We got a dog, and but I will say, I think from a point of personal pride, my favorite moment is that for the first time in 10 years, I completed a triathlon.
Whoa.
So, yeah, over 40, I can still do it. So
that's why you stand when you do podcasts, right?
That's right. Well, I'm an athlete. That's right.
I know you know
about that. A triathlete, in fact.
Triathlete. No, yeah, you know me. I am very athletic sitter.
That's right. Yeah.
No, but I will say to your question, one of my favorite things this year was, I coach like 7 teams now of my kids' sports. Mind you, I don't play them, but I coach them and really love that. That has been a highlight of my year. But honestly, I think the other one, my oldest daughter and I, we started doing karaoke every Friday night the last couple of months. And I mean, it's been the highlight of my week every week. We go and just sing probably far later than she should be awake. But it's so much fun. I love it. That's probably been the highlight for me.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, on with the news, I guess. You want to talk about some news?
Yeah. What do we got?
Well, I thought I'd start off with a fun one, which is here in Missouri, we love our guns.
Oh,
and we actually have some pre-filed bills from both Mike Koslow and Nick Schroer, all looking to actually remove the ban on silencers for guns.
So there's a House version and a Senate version of this bill?
That's right. So, for folks that aren't familiar, if you haven't ever seen a movie with a hitman, these are these little things that you can put on the end of a gun to suppress the sound. Because personally, my biggest concern living in St. Louis is that if I'm going to get shot, I don't want my ears to be ringing,
Well, or if someone gets shot outside my house, I really just don't want to have to hear that while I'm watching a movie with my kids.
That's right.
That's when I hear from constituents about their concerns about gun crime and gun violence. It's always about, it's just so loud, man. Mm-hmm. So maybe we should get rid of sirens too on those ambulances driving by. Yeah. Really do something about our real problems. No, it's weird, Joe. I wonder, they talk all the time about the importance of the Second Amendment for self-defense, like the ability to defend yourself. Do you think silencers are really an important part of self-defense? I'm curious because they've been illegal for a long time in Missouri, and it hasn't, to my knowledge, been a problem except maybe for assassins.
Yeah.
Maybe they're wanting.
I will say they position this as quite literally as it is about hearing. They're saying that there is a concern for gun owners and gun users that these silencers actually will help protect their hearing.
Wow.
Now, I don't know about you. I have personally been to a gun range before, and I noticed they had these weird things. They go over your head.
Right?
Yeah. And that seemed to be okay for me, but
they're just so uncomfortable, Joe. I mean, no one wants to have to wear headphones while they're shooting their guns, right?
No, definitely
not. I will say veterans, I know it's a common problem. Like my older brother is a veteran, and he has really bad hearing as he's gotten older. And it's actually a disability from all the gunfire in their trainings, et cetera, in the military. Um, that's a real thing. So it's interesting to me. I would rather we like focused on healthcare for veterans who have
Sure.
hearing problems, where maybe they were in contexts where they couldn't wear ear protection around gunfire, um, or again, did something about actual gun violence. But here we are addressing the real problems of our state,
That's right.
allowing people to have silencers,
Allow
priorities,
people to
and
have.
it's a got like we said, it's got a Senate bill and a House bill, so they're serious about this one, and I
Oh yeah.
would expect it to move. I mean, every year I've been there for 8 years. Every year they have to have a list of bills that they consider their pro-gun bills, where they get to say, look how pro Second Amendment we are, how pro-gun we are, and I mean they get crazier and crazier every year. I guess we're about to see legalizing silencers and machine guns are the next steps here.
Yeah, it would seem that way. I mean, it does seem like a priority. So we'll follow it more as it moves down the list. Now, speaking of priorities, government efficiency
Oh,
has always at least been a stated priority for the Missouri GOP and the GOP in general. And now you brought this one up to me earlier this week, so I'll kind of let
sure.
you lead on this. But overall, this is a new Department of Government Efficiency, or is it new? Or what you tell me.
It's not a department, just to be clear. It's a committee, right? A committee of government efficiency. Now, this was just announced by the new speaker, John Patterson out of Kansas City. And he's just riding off of the national thing, right? That Trump and Elon announced that they're doing together, right? This Department of Government Efficiency, where, of course, the most efficient thing is to have two heads of this department, right? I think we saw something like that. Well, so what John Patterson did, Speaker Patterson, is he put out a press release announcing the creation of this new committee on government efficiency and tied it directly to the Doge, they're calling it. Of course, we all know why they're calling it Doge, right? Because what good is being in government if you can't make a buck off it, Joe? I guess. Um, but so we've got a committee now called the Committee on Government Efficiency. What I find hilarious, of course, is this isn't a new committee.
Yeah,
Every year that I've been in office, there has been a committee on government efficiency. Now, when I started my first year, it was a committee on government efficiency, and then there was also a committee on downsizing government. Um, Very efficient to have both committees, I guess, separately. And they had quite a cast of characters on them. Over the years, they've evolved, and there were a couple of years I think they were combined into one. Then one was changed to government oversight. Last year, though, it was the Committee on Government Efficiency and Downsizing. It was one committee. And so here they are, maybe dividing it into two again because they want to say how efficient they are. I
yeah.
don't
I
know.
guess it remains to be seen. It doesn't say, at least in the articles that I read on it, whether or not they're going to maintain this other committee and just establish a new committee, or they're just trying to take advantage of the fact that
Oh,
there's lots of press around
it's all
this.
show, Joe.
So yeah,
It's all show. And the new chair of the committee tweeted about it last week as well, or this week. And of course, his tweet even had a picture with it of the mascot for Dogecoin, right? That he was glorifying. It's literally an ad for Dogecoin, doing what government's already doing. But how much do you want to bet that this guy owns shares or owns Dogecoins? So he's hoping with more advertising, of course, his value goes up too. I mean, it's all these guys that are really just looking to profit off of our government in any way they possibly can as they tear it apart.
yeah.
And that's what we see.
That's the other point to maintain here, right? This government efficiency mantra has been one that has been preached over and over
Yeah,
again by the Missouri GOP. And quite frankly, let's just remind folks the GOP here in Missouri has had supermajority control of the legislature and the governor for most of the last 20
that's
years.
right. And so if you think there's a problem with efficiency in our state government, guess who's in charge of it, guys?
That's right.
Uh,
You would think that we would have the most efficient government in all of existence.
well, and
And
they've even had a committee dedicated to this role the whole time
that's
of government efficiency and how efficiently they have made everything more efficient.
That's right. So speaking of
Joe,
real,
wait, one more thing about that.
oh, sorry.
Sorry. It's also worth noting we have this committee of government efficiency. Do you know how many committees we have?
No, please tell me.
75 committees in the House, in the Missouri House. 75 committees. This is the most that have ever been there. There's no reason to think they're going to get fewer this year because, of course, they won all these committees. So all their Republican members get to be chair or vice chair of a committee and say how important they are. But
Yep.
last year, the most committees, 75 committees, and guess how many bills they passed?
Tell me.
8 bills, Joe. The total number of bills that passed the legislature last year, one of the fewest in our history. And that's been true. It's gotten truer every year for the last 8 years, fewer bills each year.
Well,
I
the
guess
things
the
are efficient.
efficiency is let's spend all of our time with 75 committees in order to pass 8 bills.
That's
I
right.
mean, sounds like a massive fail to me, but here we are.
Well, I guess continuing with the story of massive fails, let's talk about some pre-filed bills
Oh,
coming
some
up
others. All
for
right.
for the upcoming legislature. So I want to do a quick preamble, which is to say that here in Missouri, something you know, but our not all the listeners may know, but here in Missouri we have our own form of direct democracy. It's written
Mhm.
into the Missouri Constitution. It's been there since the Constitution was originally authored. It's called the initiative petition process.
Yeah.
And even though we have this in the Constitution, and it was clearly important enough that it was included at the founding of the state, the folks who have been leading our state for the last 20 years continue to attempt to undo the things that Missourians vote for via that IP process, that form of direct democracy, which is why recently Missourians have moved toward fully amending the Constitution instead of just submitting these statutes, which can be quickly overturned and have been in the past by the leaders in the state. So, but Missouri GOP doesn't like that. In fact, they continue to work to try to amend the initiative petition process. In fact, I was looking at it earlier, and there's at least 2 Senate bills that I can see, and there's probably some more in the House that have been pre-filed to change the initiative petition process. They did this last year. They're going to do it again this year. So we're going to talk a little bit about the efforts to overturn the initiative petition process. But before we do that, I wanted to talk about some of the things that were just passed that they're already trying to overturn. So, first, let's talk about Proposition A. This increased the minimum wage and guaranteed sick leave, basically, for workers in the state. And we already have it is let's see, House Bill 567. This House bill will delay the implementation of Proposition A and what maybe even make sure that it never gets implemented. Is that right?
I mean, I think that's the right question. Look, the fact is they hate them. They hate the minimum wage. When we had this issue come up back earlier, 6 years ago, or whichever last time it's been debated on the floor, we got them to vote, and basically every single Republican stood up on the floor and said they didn't believe there should be a minimum wage at all. They think that we should just go back to the days of the robber barons and let people pay dirt wages because if they're desperate and they'll take it, that's their own fault, right? That's the market, the hand of the free market at work. They don't want it to happen. They don't want it to go up this year at all. And so they're going, well, maybe it doesn't look as bad if we say, yeah, we're cool with this. We understand voters voted for this. And they gave us a 6-month period before it goes into effect. But maybe if we just delay that by another year, it won't look like we're trying to undo the will of voters. It'll just be, we just need more time to transition,
That's
Joe.
right. And also,
Uh,
let's not forget that maybe if they delay it a year, voters might forget about
yeah. And then a year later, they can very quietly
it.
just be like, never mind.
That's
Never mind.
exactly right. That's exactly right.
Or delay it again. Say, you know what? We just haven't had enough time to transition. We're going to give it another year and keep doing it like they have with so many other things that they've shot. They can't kick the can down the road, when really they're just trying to stop the thing from happening entirely.
So this actually, and this is really to the point about the initiative petition process and why it has changed. So that's a proposition. Those can be overturned because it's just adding something to statute, and the legislature can just create a new law essentially or change it however they want. However, most advocates have now moved in the initiative petition process to amending the Constitution because
Right.
that can't be changed unless it goes back to a vote of the people, mostly. However, we're going to talk about some of these constitutional amendments and how they're trying to change those. The most important one to them, it seems, is Amendment 3, which allowed for Missourians to have access to reproductive health care,
Right.
specifically abortion. And essentially, it took us back to the standards for Roe v. Wade. The
Right.
line is viability. And after that viability line, as it says in the now amendment, determined by medical professionals, it can be outlawed. Abortion can be outlawed or heavily,
Regulated,
right?
limited, yes.
Um,
With an exception, of course, for the health of the mother.
that's right. That's
Right.
right. Now, the one thing that is very clear, though, is that that is not good enough for our representatives here in Missouri.
Oh no,
They
they're
are
furious.
working
They're
to,
furious.
that's right. Several pieces of
Yep.
legislation have been pre-filed across a whole bunch of different forms to make changes. Here's a couple quick examples. So one of the, I guess, most restrictive ones is they're looking to literally just send another a
Yes.
question on the ballot back to voters that basically would likely include an exception for rape and incest.
Maybe.
However,
Yeah.
that
Maybe.
would require, from what I have read, it would require for the victim of that assault to file a police report.
Right.
Victim advocacy groups have said is a problem in this type of
Absolutely. Yeah.
legislation. Um, there are some other examples. So one of the other examples is that they aren't trying to actively send it back to the voters, but change the definition of viability.
Right.
And now, whether or not that could hold up in court, I don't know. You probably would have a better understanding of that than me, but that is another way. So if they are thinking of ways,
Yeah.
they don't
Of course.
send it back to the voters, but they might be able to get around this and again go back to fully restricting access to reproductive health care.
Yeah, I mean that's the name of the game for them. It's A, can they undo it entirely and essentially trick voters into passing something else, which they have pulled off before, with, you might remember, Clean Missouri and Dirty Missouri. Um, uh, and they would do that. They showed us the model for that last session when they were actually toying with putting a different question on the ballot at the same time. We had a hearing with Representative Justin Sparks, I think, if I remember right, had a constitutional amendment that would have essentially put into the Constitution the exact extremely radical abortion ban that they passed into law in 2017. But then, of course, they tried to modify it just slightly to where they could make it so that the first bullet point was that it was about tax credits to help pregnant women, which it didn't even create tax credits. It just said the legislature can, which of course the legislature already can. So this meaningless bullet point about that, and maybe helping tax credits for foster care and adoption, again, didn't actually do anything to support it, just said, we will support it. And they tried to then hide the abortion stuff at the bottom and didn't even say it would ban abortion. It didn't even say that in their ballot description, and that was the gist of it. So we're likely to see a move like that again, where they try to write some lies on the ballot, but actually pass a constitutional amendment that undoes this thing. But then, of course, if they think that they're not going to pull that off, their other option is try and narrow the window of what they think the definitions are, like viability. And we're going to see that, even before Dobbs, we saw that in Missouri, where abortion was practically eliminated in Missouri, especially elective abortion was pretty much gone in Missouri. Even before that happened, there were very few abortions happening. And that's because they put all kinds of restrictions in place, like things like the width of the hallways in the hospitals. I mean, all kinds of regulations in place that their sole purpose was to make it harder and harder and harder to get an abortion or to provide an abortion. I suspect we'll be seeing a lot of that again, and then we'll see lots of court fights over whether they've gone too far past the limits of the amendment. We'll see.
Yeah, it is not surprising for most of us, but it may be surprising for some Missouri voters who
Yeah,
think.
I mean, for those of us that have been paying attention to it, it's constant. This idea of Missourians pass something, sometimes overwhelmingly pass something, and the legislature comes in and just says, "Nah, we don't really agree." Um, and it's, I mean, it started with puppy mills, but all the way to the minimum wage stuff we talked about, to Medicaid expansion. You know, voters did put that in the Constitution by a decent margin, and the legislature tried for a full session to just say, well, we're still not going to fund it. We refuse, even though the Constitution says we have to.
Yeah,
And
the
it had to go all the
courts.
way to the Supreme Court for a
That's right.
unanimous Supreme Court decision to say,
Yeah.
no, no, legislature, you have to follow the Constitution. And so then they're like, well, if we have to follow it, then we're going to try and trick voters into changing it instead. But I want to back up. I think that there's an interesting thing about this decision that advocacy groups are making to amend the Constitution. It's not really new, and it's not new to advocacy groups. And a lot of times people talk about the Constitution as it should be like this very small, sacred document that doesn't change and is very vague. And so then most of the law actually happens in statute, sort of modeling it after the federal Constitution, right? Which is more of a blueprint for the overall thing, but then the details get hammered out in law. The thing is, with our state constitution, that's never been how it works. Instead, the Constitution is really just where we put laws that we don't want the legislature to be able to change without the voters' approval. And so it's got all kinds of things. It's got bingo rules in it. Like, in order to change the rules about literally how a church runs bingo, we have to amend the state constitution, because at the time when that went in there, voters cared a lot more about limits on gambling, and they wanted to have a vote. They didn't want the legislature to go in knowing that someone might be trying to make a bunch of money off gambling and do something without the voters saying okay.
I mean, we just saw this on the last ballot, right? If you want to add a casino,
Right?
that has to go to the will of the
Right.
people. People have to vote on that because that's, again, in the Missouri Constitution.
Exactly right. So I think it's important that people realize that the Constitution is really just, it's full of law, right? It's full of things that we might otherwise think of as dense statutes, but it has to be able to be amended pretty easily, functionally, for voters to be able to do that. That's important to be able to make changes down the road. Uh, but the voters have said, if you want to make changes on those, just make sure we get to vote on it. And I think it's really important that the legislature respect that, especially when the legislature doesn't seem to actually represent the people most of the time in the work they're actually doing.
Yeah, and
Um,
at the end of the day, viewing the Missouri Constitution as some holy document is disingenuous, and it's really just politically expedient
yeah,
for the folks that are trying to change it. But
absolutely.
speaking of political expediency, let's talk about what the governor also can do to overturn the will of the people and the courts.
Oh,
So we just had. So I think I've spoken not here but elsewhere about the fact that Governor-elect Kehoe said publicly that he was planning to overturn or uh, commend the sentence of Eric DeVulcaneri, who is a Kansas City police officer. Well, Mike Parson has done that.
yeah,
And just to give you a little bit of background on this story, basically, this Kansas City police officer, former Kansas City police officer, and his partner got a call about a man speeding around his neighborhood, and they approached him as he was pulling into his own garage.
yeah,
Now, they, within seconds, apparently got out of their car and shot this man dead.
yeah. I think it was like within 8 seconds they had
That's
their
right.
guns out and shot him,
They
killed him.
claimed that they thought that he was going for a gun or something to that nature.
Oh,
A gun was found on the ground next to the car. However, the actual court decided that that was not the case. In fact, the prosecution basically made the case that gun was planted.
yeah,
And there's a lot of other aspects of the case, but the bottom line that you need to know is that the court listened to all this evidence, and in
and
a very
a
rare case,
jury of independent people.
actually, just to correct that, this specific case was a bench trial. Um,
Oh, he
so
chose not to go in front of a jury.
he chose not to go in front of
Yeah,
a jury, which happens sometimes in cases like this because they don't think that they're going to get a fair shake.
sure.
Because I don't know, maybe he thought that the judge would give him a better deal. But at the end of the day, they heard the evidence. The court decided guilty, and this guy was sentenced. However, Governor Parson has decided that he's going to overturn this. Commend his sentence, right? Um,
Commute
eh,
it.
commute his sentence,
Yeah.
um, as opposed to overturning the conviction. So yeah,
Yeah. Another
this,
of so many examples of our state coming in, uh, specifically to Kansas City and St. Louis, and saying, we are in charge of your criminal justice system, and we think police can do whatever they want, frankly, especially to Black men. And this is one of the rare times that there was actually a conviction of a police officer for killing a Black man. And our governor came in and said, despite your locally elected prosecutor finding the evidence to be sufficient that this guy should be convicted of this, and a court and a judge deciding that, yeah, the evidence is sufficient, he should be convicted, Governor Parsons going to come in and say, yeah, but he's one of the blue, and so he should just get to go. And it is infuriating. And I mean, when you look at it, as Kansas City still has a state-run police force too. The city doesn't even control their own police force. One of the only cities in the country that is still true. And here they are. The people that live there don't have control of their own police force. The state does. And now the state, we'll see, will just step in and overturn a conviction of a police officer for abusing his authority and killing somebody, and say we're going to override your local control on that too. And of course, it's a governor that a majority of the residents and voters of Kansas City voted against to be governor. They're not who they picked. He's not who they picked. And here he is getting to take away their control of their own police force and criminal justice system entirely, really. And honestly, I mean, we're seeing this in St. Louis County right now.
that's
Uh,
right. I was just
this
going to say
fight
that
over
it's just the justice system too. It's not just the police.
Right. Well, we've got the prosecutor in St. Louis County that, of course, was just elected to Congress, leaving an opening. And every time in the history of this state that there has been an opening in a charter county for prosecutor, the county executive or board, council, appoint the replacement. Well, the county exec, of course, appointed a replace or announced an appointment of a replacement prosecutor. Parson came in and said, actually, this is my responsibility. I get to appoint a replacement. So, and the courts ended up siding with him, even though this literally strays from the entire history of our state, has not been done. And the whole idea of a local prosecutor is that they reflect the will of the voters of that county. And here he is, again, somebody that wasn't voted for by the voters of that county. And he's going to come in and say, no, I think this other person should be prosecutor.
That's
It's
right.
just a complete denial of democracy and local rights because of, frankly, race and party.
But also, and not, who cares about hypocrisy anymore? But I will mention it. He literally just allowed the St. Charles County
Right.
prosecutor in that county to
Be appointed by the county exec.
appointed by the county
Yeah.
executive. So
Right, but St. Charles, of course, let's be clear, is a red county
that's
that
right.
votes Republican. So actually, it almost would have been more okay for the guy they voted for as governor to do it. But he's like, nah, I'm good with this as long as it's Republicans appointing him.
Right.
But
And the
if
courts have
it's
agreed, though.
Democrats and people of color, and liberals appointing a prosecutor, well, we can't have that.
Sure.
They shouldn't get to govern themselves, God forbid.
Yeah, I mean that certainly seems to be the case. I mean, you may have identified a theme in the last few topics that we've discussed, which is that the GOP once championed the idea of limiting federal and state government in favor of local control. The voice of the people is another way to say it. Government is most efficient when it's closest to the people, is something that I've heard lots of people say, and I often agree with, by the way. However, it seems that that's no longer the favored approach.
They only want local control when they think people that look and think like them have that control locally.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
no,
they want to control it and enforce it on people that don't look or think like them.
Yeah.
It's
and this also goes to the fact that we've already had in the past, as you mentioned, the Kansas City Police Department. The control of that police department has been taken away from the city of Kansas City.
Yeah.
They're attempting to do the same thing to St. Louis,
Yeah, well, because St. Louis was under state control up until like a decade ago, and they just finally gave it back to us, and now they're making it. It's one of the new governor's top priorities is getting state control back of the St. Louis City Police Force. But look, again, with this, I'm sorry, but race is a big part of this. When you look at the history of those police forces being state controlled, it goes back to the Confederacy. That's why the big cities in our state had state control of the government of their police forces was to try and make sure that the Confederacy had control of our armories. Right? It was explicitly to have white supremacists in charge of our police forces in the two cities that didn't support slavery. I mean,
Well,
that's notable,
that's it. That is notable, but I will say that even if you're going to say that that is not the motivation today,
right?
and that
Right.
it is
Even
it
though,
is
again, this is the two cities that have black mayors as well.
sure, but they also are the bluest cities, and I think that
Yeah,
this probably has a little bit personally. I think this has a little bit more to do with politics than race. Certainly, race I'm sure plays a part in it, but it also is
it's hard to
is
ignore.
politics.
It's
Either
hard
way.
to ignore when only the only two cities that have black mayors are the two places where the state insists on taking control of the police force. And by the way, when they gave the police force back to local control of St. Louis was when we had a white man as mayor. It's hard to ignore that. And if you want to have a police force that has the trust of the community, when they're already accused of frequently and with lots of data behind it, treating black residents and white residents differently, uh, it's hard to ignore that reality and expect the community to be building trust with their
Well,
police
this is the
when
point
that's the
that I
situation.
wanted to make and talk a little bit about too, is that just from a purely practical standpoint, removing local control, which by the way, essentially removes accountability, at
Right?
least to some degree, from the local community, then you've basically got an operating for
An
or sorry, an
occupying force.
occupying force
Yeah.
in that city. Because if the local population has very limited voice in how their police department is run, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Yes, Kansas City, the mayor has one seat. The way that it works, right? And please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the way that it works is that there's like a 5-seat board that runs the police department in Kansas City. The mayor has one seat. So he has 20%. Everybody
Right.
else is put on that board
By the
by
governor.
the governor.
The
And
governor and the Republican legislature that confirms the appointments.
that's right.
Right.
So it's really just a token seat anyway, because he
Yeah.
has very limited input. I mean, it's not even like 1 out of 3. 1 out of 5 is very easy to ignore. I mean, I think the super minority, a member of the super minority here in Missouri might be able to speak to the fact that when you are in a super minority, it's a lot harder to get your voice heard.
Yeah, to say the least. But I think it's also, I mean, this is just one piece of the puzzle, too. I mean, like we talked about the appointment of the prosecutors, but our judges, even, in St. Louis, Kansas City, and a couple of the other counties that are bluer in this state, uh, our judges are actually appointed by the nonpartisan court plan, which I actually think works pretty well because they're nominated by a judicial commission of actual lawyers. Um, and then the governor picks among them to appoint the judges. But again, what that means is it's the state governor who often got a small minority of the votes in St. Louis City or Kansas City, ultimately deciding who the judges are here. Um, whereas in a county like St. Charles or every single red county in this state, they're elected judges. And the Republicans are good with that because they feel like, well, it's going to be a Republican elected judge. In fact, many of them got donations from the Republican Party to their campaigns. They're fundraising, they're doing all of this. Now, of course, they're right now trying to undo the nonpartisan court plan. They want to get rid of it because they don't like the lawyers appointing judges that actually care about the law or nominating judges that actually care about the law. But ironically, they don't want to get rid of it and replace it in St. Louis with elected judges like St. Charles has. No, they just want to get rid of it entirely and make it a straight governor and Senate appointment. So again, they want to take even more control
Yeah.
from lawyers that live here or people that live here. and put it in the hands of the Republican state lawmakers and governor.
At the end
I,
of the
I
day,
mean,
this is about power, right? I
it's
mean,
entirely about power.
this is the same. We listen. If you don't know the history, we had a piece of legislation, an amendment to the Constitution called Clean Missouri, where we specifically went after gerrymandering.
Right.
Okay, which if you want to consolidate power into fewer and fewer hands, gerrymandering is a great way to do it, especially in a state like Missouri.
And they do it openly and explicitly.
And you can do it openly and explicitly. We passed an amendment to the Missouri Constitution to have an independent board that would help prevent gerrymandering going forward. And Republicans did exactly what they're trying to do with the abortion
Right.
amendment. They sent a what I would say is a little tricky amendment to the people,
Deceptive is a very nice word for it.
and the Republicans tricked voters basically
They straight up
into
lied.
getting rid
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah. They put deceptive ballot language and ballot candy on the ballot, and made it look like voters were voting for transparency and ethics reform. And the very last bullet point on the list was, and ensure that a bipartisan commission draws the districts. Well, of course, the bipartisan commission is precisely what the point of Clean Missouri was, getting rid of that and making it a nonpartisan.
Right.
Because if people are given the choice, do you want a bipartisan or a nonpartisan commission doing this? People choose nonpartisan because they don't think that party politics should play a role in how our districts are drawn. Because right now we have politicians choosing their voters instead of voters choosing their politicians.
Tell
And
me
they
about that
intentionally,
bipartisan
what's
commission,
that?
though. Tell me about that bipartisan commission, though. So, how many Republicans and Democrats are on the bipartisan commission?
Oh, no, it's 50-50.
Oh, it is 50.
Yeah, that it's 50-50. And I mean, it could be worse. This last cycle, it actually played out reasonably well. I'll say that. But it's still, even within the parties, creates really problematic districting where individual politicians might have inside tracks with the people on the board, and they draw districts to draw their most likely primary competitors out of their own district, on top of the overall problem of parties trying to draw, the party in power trying to draw the balance that they can have across the whole state. Um, and that we see more egregiously, I would say, with our congressional districts, where it was this big fight we had this time around, where the Republicans were very explicitly just trying to say, how can we take what is close to a 50-50 state and get 7 out of the 8 districts to be drawn solidly red?
Right.
Right? How can we make it so that even if you represent half of the state in viewpoint, that half that they don't like, that isn't in power, only has 1/8 of the representation in our federal government? It's horrifying. And they do it openly and explicitly, and they're allowed to do it unless we stop them with our Constitution.
Which is a tall ladder to climb.
It is.
Okay, and on that joyous note, we are going to end the show. But before we do, I'm going to ask you a simple question, Peter. We've talked about some challenges, especially based on local control and politicians trying to consolidate power and take it away from people in Missouri. How can folks get involved? What can they do? Is this just an all hope is lost situation,
No.
or what
It's
can we be doing? What can the average person listening to this podcast do to help uh, make Missouri a little bit more of a state that actually represents its people?
sure. Well, look, first of all, I am never a believer that all hope is lost. I think that, our government and our politics, it's like a pendulum that swings a lot of times. And right now we've been in a really tough place in Missouri for a while. I do believe that there is room for that pendulum to swing back, but it takes work. It takes everybody getting involved, getting active, and getting engaged. Now, it's hard to do. People are busy, so there are lots of different ways you can do it, at different levels, right, of investment. And I would say, first of all and foremost, actually pay attention to what's happening at the state level, whether that's, listening to podcasts like this or other ones out there, staying on social media and keeping an eye on what's happening, occasionally watching committees. I mean, that's a stretch maybe for some of you. I'm sorry, it's hard to sit through, but reading the news and keeping an eye on what's happening. but also talk about it with people. Talk about it with the folks around you in your circles. Make sure that everyone else knows what's going on. So often, I think our problems here at their root are because most people in Missouri don't actually have any idea what's happening at the state level. And so, how can we have accountability as voters if we don't even know what's happening?
I can't tell you how many times I've told people that I know one story that's happening
Yeah,
in Missouri about the wild shit that goes down in the government in this
right.
state, and boy, they are floored.
Yeah, it's astonishing. I mean, and it's just there aren't a lot of places to see that. So I get that it's hard, but we got to pay attention and we got to share those stories with other people when you hear about them. Now, if you want to get more involved, there are lots of advocacy groups doing great work that you can get involved with. I'm not going to list them all right now because then I would leave some out and that would be uncool. But I'd also say get involved in your local party organizations. That may be Democrat or Republican or a different party entirely. But look, Republicans are going to only get more sane if they have more sane people involved. That is also true of the Democrats, depending on how you feel about Democrats. And I hear people, like especially progressives in my circles, complain a lot about the Democrats did this wrong, or did this wrong, or did this wrong. Well, the Democrats is really just, for the most part, the people that volunteered to do more work with the party. If you want to be critical of what they're doing, maybe step up and help. Maybe step up and try and contribute those ideas at a local meeting. Go there, join a committee, run for something. If you're really ready to take it to the next level, there are all kinds of things you can run for, from committee man, committee woman, up to state rep or beyond. There's so many ways to get involved there, but also follow politicians and legislators that you think are actually doing good work. They're often going to be your best source of information, but they also need support. It's a tough, crummy job. Show them some love. Donate if you can, whether that's time or money. They could use all the help they can get. And
And I just
rather than spending 3 hours explaining all the things they can do.
Yeah, and I will add one thing too, particularly at the local level. Speaking as someone who's, childhood friends with somebody who's been in the legislature for 8 years, pick up the phone, send an email, call,
Yeah.
email your local rep or a different rep.
And
You'd
whether
be
you like them or not.
Whether you like them
Yeah.
or not, you'd be surprised how responsive they might actually be, because they do kind of have to care about what folks in their district actually have to say.
And if we expect political courage from them, they need to hear from us that people are pushing them to do it and have their backs if they take bold steps. So reach out. And honestly, mine's only change from challenging conversations. So challenge your reps, challenge your elected officials.
And that is it. I hope that you'll join us again in the future as we discuss the important bits of news in Missouri politics and dive deeper on some of the bigger issues that are facing our state. If you have any thoughts on topics that we should cover, or if you want to just yell at us, please comment.
I'm used to that.
Yes, you can find us on your major social media platforms, or just search for What's Up with Mo. Please subscribe, follow, do all those things. And thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today. I am Joe.
I'm Peter. Have a nice new year. See you next year.
Have a nice new year. See you next year.